First You Think is a not-for-profit ministry of the First Unitarian Church of Des Moines. Support us at ucdsm.org today.
It's really good to be with you all this morning. I want to ask, what is your favorite counterintuitive advice? Do you have some favorite counterintuitive advice? When I was teaching music educators, it occurred to me at some point that so much of the strategy that we were giving them for success in rehearsal was counterintuitive. Here's an example. If the ensemble's not watching you, conduct smaller. If you're giving a lot of verbal instructions to the group and you feel like they've kind of tuned you out, stop talking for a second. They filed these away as tips and tricks for leading choirs, and I guess in a sense they were. But I was trying to move them to something bigger, something I invite us to hold together this morning. In any situation in life there is, does this work? There it is. There is a stimulus, and there's the intuitive response, the natural response. That's the one you don't have to think about, it just happens. But if we can pause, if we can make a choice, there is often a more effective counterintuitive response, more effective response. So when you're sitting there and you're conducting, the natural thing, the thing your hands will do is just to start getting bigger, to flag them down. Or when you're talking to the group and they're not listening, it's natural to get faster and louder and faster and louder, and they just continue to tune you out. It's counterintuitive to take that other approach, but far more effective. President Lincoln knew something about being effective, I like to think. And my favorite counterintuitive advice is attributed to him. Apparently, he said, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I shall spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." Give me 6 hours to chop down the tree, I shall spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. It's beautiful. I'm sure it's good advice for logging, I don't know. But metaphorically, it's brilliant because maybe it's just me, but often it feels in life like you're whacking away at the metaphorical tree with a dull axe. And then here comes this unlikely president, this brooding man that counterintuitively led the nation toward the brink of annihilation in order to save it. And he offers this advice. He says, what if you spent some time focusing and sharpening before you did your work? It's a weird combination of like folksy prairie wisdom and deep spiritual truth. In ministry, you find yourself drowning in the counterintuitive advice of religious teachers, past and present. Right? Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is 3 chapters full of counterintuitive approaches. It is not intuitive if you get slapped on this cheek to offer this. My natural response might be to slap back or to block, but it is counterintuitive, right? Or my favorite from the Dalai Lama, who says, on an average day, I meditate for an hour. But on a very busy day, I meditate for 2 hours. It's brilliant. But we shouldn't be surprised that religious leaders take these counterintuitive approaches. If you think about it, spiritual, ethical communities are foundationally built to take a counterintuitive stance to the world that we live in, right? Sometimes they ask aspirational things of us, like offering the other cheek. Sometimes they ask impossible things of us. In that same Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, therefore, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. That's a reach goal, right? But we don't let ourselves off the hook much in Unitarian Universalism when we covenant to affirm the worthiness and dignity of every person. Because I suspect there's a few people on your list that don't make that cut. It's aspirational, that sort of counterintuitive approach. But we do it anyways because we find over and over that it is joyful and indeed more effective to take that approach. Until the stimuli that face us are too much, are too hard, what is the counter-effective, value-oriented approach to fascism, or a constitutional crisis, or legalized discrimination? Can I be clear that this is not the sermon I wanted to give? I wanted to come here on our first day together, and our first impression, and talk about, I don't know, how cool it is that the root system in forests, that trees talk to each other. That would be so great, right? And then it occurred to me that that is the intuitive response to suffering. Step away from it. It is counterintuitive to compassionately sit with the pain of the world that we live in. So let's talk about some hard things. I looked it up. The Iowa state motto is, "Our liberties we prize, our rights we will maintain." Our liberties we prize, our rights we... Yeah, you are already seeing where I'm going with the sermon. That's good. State Bill 418, which goes into effect July 1st, tramples both rights and liberties. It removes legal protections for our trans, non-binary, gender-expansive, and intersex beloveds. It even claims that separate is not necessarily unequal, because that's ever gone well in America. It is a factually inaccurate bill. It is an immoral bill. This is not about political parties. Unitarian Universalism has always been, and always will be, pluralistic, right? But we do have values like pluralism, like the equity and inherent worth and value of everyone. And a bill like this, well, that crashes into all of our values. And so it makes you feel a kind of a way, right? I have trans and gender-expansive family members. I have trans and gender-expansive and non-binary and intersex friends and colleagues. And when I see a bill that says they don't exist, that's not a real thing, I feel some feelings. And I don't like those, right? And so you could be feeling anger, or rage, or sorrow, or exasperation, or despair. Wherever it is, I invite you to feel the feeling. One thing I have learned in my life is that you do not find that value-oriented, counterintuitive approach when you're in the middle of that feeling. So I promise that we will come back to this question: what is the counterintuitive approach to legislation like that? But we're not going to get there just yet. May I pivot? What is the purpose of a Unitarian Universalist church? I didn't say I would pivot with an easier question, just a different one. What is the purpose of a UU church? This is one of my favorite questions to ask congregants. Let's see if that'll do it. And here, in no particular order, are the top three answers I've heard over the years. Okay, this one's definitely number one. It's people say, I want to be with like-minded people. Second most popular answer, to think about ethical and spiritual questions. And then thirdly, to be comforted, connected, less alone in the world. These are great answers, and I should leave it there. But I trouble the waters and I reframe the question. What is the purpose of a Unitarian Universalist church that is different than a book club or the Sierra Club? Book clubs are great. The Sierra Club is great. And if we're using the Sierra Club to mean community action, social justice to make the world more sustainable and equitable and peaceful, keep on keeping on. But I want to suggest that there's something about a Unitarian Universalist church that is deeper, different, richer than either of those two things. You can poke at this question a little bit, and you can ask it in a kind of a mean way. You can say, what is the purpose of a UU church? With sort of a Garrison Keillor edge to the question. And that suggests that there's no particular purpose to why we gather, what we're doing here. And there's a dig in that, right? The implication is that if you ask a Lutheran, what is the purpose of a Lutheran church? They will have a ready answer that would be something like, oh, I'm glad you asked. We gather to worship the Lord in gladness and be good disciples of his word in the world. And we don't have as tidy an answer as that because our commitment to pluralism. In this room here, as well as in UU spaces around the nation today, we gather together as UUs who are Christian, who are atheist, who are Buddhist, who are humanist, who are agnostic, who are Muslim, who are Jewish, who are pagan, questioners, wonderers, wanderers, and we all come together for our purpose, which is not creedally bound, as we already covenanted to earlier. But it is worth it, I want to suggest, to stay with this question, to dig a little deeper into why are we here? Because the organization that knows its purpose is an organization that changes the world. An organization that knows exactly why it exists. Makes a huge difference in the community. If we're going to be honest, most organizations have a mission statement buried somewhere in their policies or bylaws that no one knows. And they do operate under a mission, but they've just never said it out loud. And it reads like this. We exist to keep existing. We exist to keep existing. That's intuitive. Yeah? That's a natural kind of a mission. And that's clearly not good enough, right? That's not why we gather, just to keep existing. There's something about what we do that is special and focused because there's an electricity to a community, to an organization that knows this is our work to do. And this work over here is really good, but they're doing it. And this is their work over there. We're going to do this. And there's a focus to it that becomes electric. And so we dig into that question, and I think we can find it, right? So we come back to those three options here. To be with like-minded people. Is that why we exist? Well, on the face of it, it doesn't pass the, is it different than a book club or the Sierra Club? But it's a good answer. You're out there in the world as a retiree, as a middle school teacher, as an oncology nurse, and you're seen in your role, but you're not seen in your complexity. And so we come here and you're known as my fellow pagan, my fellow alto in choir, my fellow owl teacher. And we need that space to be seen in our values and what we bring to this world. To live otherwise is maddening. To ask ethical and spiritual questions, that's got to be a big part of why we're here, right? We look out at the night sky and wonder, I hope the clouds clear tonight for the new moon so you can see some stars. And just go, wow. We cry at the ends of movies. We meet friends for a cup of tea and sit with them with empathy while they ask, am I doing enough in this world? Right? We gather and ask these tough questions. That is clearly part of why we're here. Is it to be less alone and more connected? Sure. Again, that works for any of those other clubs, but that's a big piece of it. I try to remind myself as often as I can that for hundreds of thousands of years, we evolved to live in multi-generational communities of mutual support. And only in the last blip of history did we say, you know what, I'm just going to live in my own little domicile, separate from everyone else. I won't even know my neighbors' names. I got this world all by myself. And so we miss the campfire. We miss gathering together at the end of the day to share our food and songs and dances and stories. And we recreate that in some way here, don't we? So all three of those, I think, are part of it, but I still feel like there may be a tidier way to articulate what are we doing here. So we'll put a pin in that. I promised that after the feeling passed, we'd come back to these pressing questions. What is the counterintuitive response to this world today? And like any candidate for anything, I'm going to answer that question by asking myself a different question. Over this next week, as I get to meet you, one of the questions that I would probably hear 100 times is, yes, that's a good question too. One of the questions I'll hear is, what brought you here? Why did you choose the call here? There are many answers, but there are two that leap forward to the front. The two things that you did, two counterintuitive practices that are value and purpose-oriented that opened me, heart, mind, and body to come here. Now, the first has to do with money, which no one likes talking about. So I'll soften it with a joke. Now I got to think of one. There are two things that are true about every church system throughout all of geography and all of history. The first is that you will never agree on the hymns, okay? You could pick a hymn and it'll split the room, right? Just make peace with that. It has been true for millennia. But the second thing that's true about church systems is that they grow, they contract, they grow, they contract. That's just the phases of the system itself. When they grow, then you need more staff and you need a bigger building, right? And so things get more expensive, which is fine because pledges are up here. When they contract, pledges drop. And now the intuitive response is, well, we just need to fire those staff and we need to sell the big building and go to the small building. This church, like many churches, said, no, there's a counterintuitive approach. We can grow our way out of this. We'll make an endowment, right? And what we'll do is we know that we can't get people to raise their pledges 35%. Right? Maybe. Where's the stewardship team? 35%'s a reach, right? But we can get one-time gifts, and we can make this big pile. I think this is the next slide. This is my little math slide. There it is. And we can make a big pile of money, of capital that we'll call the endowment, and it'll generate interest. And that interest we will take off every year, and that'll cover the gap between where our pledges are and where our costs are. We will grow our way out of this. It's a great counterintuitive strategy. Many churches do it. But that's not what made me fall in love with this church. That still fits the mission. We exist to keep existing, right? And money is often where you show your values. What broke my heart open was someone in some meeting must have said, that's not what our money's for. And so you did something I have never seen, and I've worked in a lot of churches. You said, what if half of that money goes back into the community? What if we create a Reach Grant program, and you come up with an idea, and you come up with an idea, and those ideas translate into action in the community? Let me put it this way. An endowment is a reservoir of water, and you built channels for the streams of love to freely flow. I've never seen anything like it. And I thought, now this is a congregation that knows why it gathers. Right? These Reach Grants create a new channel for the water to keep flowing. I left you on the hook about Bill 418, and I'm aware of that. 5 years ago, if you can go back then, remember? All the talking heads in cable felt like it was okay to debate whether trans people exist, to debate whether they should get to pee or play 9th grade soccer. They were having this debate, which is not a debate, right? We talked about that as our sixth value immediately, the flourishing of everyone. But here they are having their debate about what people should get to do. You started a festival, a Trans Lives Festival, right here. It was a purpose-filled, love-centered choice that was counterintuitive. You looked around and you said, love is in need of love. We can do this. This is why we're here. And you built a festival that filled a need so deep that it grew and grew. And my understanding is that a couple weeks ago, 1,500 people partied right here. Yes. I didn't do it, you did, right? It is the most extraordinarily beautiful, purpose-filled, counterintuitive action I've ever seen. Because it'd be easy to take the bait. Here's the vitriol, we'll meet them down here. And you said, we're not even debating that. We are saying everybody is loved and welcome here. Right? There's the party. Over the next week, I look forward to the honor of getting to know you all as your candidate for minister. I cannot possibly predict all of the stimuli that will come our way in our journey together, right? But I do know that this is a congregation that can and regularly does clearly articulate why we're here. We are here to love radically, to grow ethically and spiritually, and serve justly. Amen.